I always have my co-author, Jeffrey Miller from Buffalo, who stands in with me when we do these, and he wrote a book with Marv Levy, his autobiography. So he said, well, he's written 11 NFL books. So he's usually with us, but he lives in South Buffalo, and he called me today and said, I'm not going to make it. So I'm doing this solo, and I got to try to cover 70 years in 1 hour. So it's going to be really crazy. So I'm just going to kind of just give an overview. My name is John Steffenhagen, grew up in Fairport, graduated in Fairport at 85. Coach Santini, who I was the biggest kid in school, and Coach Santini, I knew him well, and he's like, you got to play out for a football team. And I'm like, I don't want to because, one, I was extremely shy. And this has made me, this is like so out of my comfort zone. So if I start to hyperventilate, you'll know why. Someone might have to pull out a paper bag. But it's like, so I didn't play football, which is probably one of my biggest regrets. But with the concussions, now it's good. So my story is that my great-grandfather is a co-founder of the NFL, one of 10 men who formed the National Football League in 1920. So as a kid growing up, I didn't know this. It's like here you got your great-grandfather is a co-founder of the NFL and you don't know it. The family, there was no sports fans in the family. We were all race car into racing. My dad was a race car driver. I would be on the pit crew. It was all racing. So when he died in 1976, a lot of the stuff that he had in his basement, which was basically the Hall of Fame, went to the Hall of Fame. However, before my great-grandmother had given away millions of dollars to the Hall of Fame, they took it, my mom, my aunts ran over to the house and filled what they could of things that were in his downstairs. So these things have been with me for my whole life. And back in the 80s, we didn't have Google. So I was just like, okay, this is all cool stuff from the Jeffersons, but I never heard of the Jeffersons. There can't be anybody, just a little team. Well, 20 years ago, I went to the Pro Football Research Association and told them who I am. And they're like, you have all these things. And they're like, oh my God, it's so rare. And they're like, yeah, we know who Leo Lyons is. And I'm like, I didn't think anybody knew. However, things would give me a look into his past because when I was 8 or 9 years old, he lived in Pittsford, New York. And I would be over at his house playing with my Hot Wheel cars, pretending I'm racing them. And my mom one day said, John, please be quiet. Leo has company over. And this was during the summer of 74, I believe, or 75. So these two guys had come over, long coats, hats, cigars, and come to find out that was George Halas and Art Rooney, the two owners of the teams. So they're over to the house. So I was like, again, I didn't think anything of it then. But, in retrospect now, I look back and I'm like, oh my God, why were these guys at my great-grandfather's house? Well, when you find out his story, which is going to be incredibly difficult, you'll know why he was. So that's about me. So now I've got a million things going on. Netflix is talking about doing a series. We got a book just came out. There's a lot of stuff going on. So I want to just give a background more about Leo, my great-grandfather, and the team. So it started in 1889. The University of Rochester had a bunch of kids that were expelled because back in 1889, football was just turned in from rugby to football. And so these kids, there was a lot of gambling, a lot of deaths. There would be a death toll in the newspapers every month for people because they would stomp on players. There was no rules, basically. So in 1889, the University of Rochester started their program. And then in 1896 or 1898, the Rochester Jeffersons were formed by kids that were expelled from the University of Rochester. And the University of Rochester did not even know that this is how an NFL team became to be actually until months ago. And they're like, what? And so, yeah, in these boxes that I say as well, I have a lot of these mementos. I have thousands of documents signed between George Eastman and Leo. You'll find out all the things that he did, but you'll be amazed. So here's where I got to stay on track. Okay, so 1898, they formed the team. It's named after Jefferson Avenue, the neighborhood in Rochester, downtown. Back then, teams would name themselves after the neighborhoods that they played in. So that's the University of Rochester. So we move on to 1906, 1907. The team is still around. Leo joins the team in 1908. 1906-07, the Rochester Jeffersons are a sandlot team, just a bunch of kids playing in fields around Rochester. At this time, 1906, now it was set in 1907, Leo becomes friends with Walter Hagen, the golfer who won 9 world championships or whatever, because he lived in Corbett's Glen in Penfield. So they had become best friends. So as that's going on, and I have the Houdini thing just got on there because I don't know if people know that Houdini's family lived here or still does. And in 1907, he jumped off a bridge downtown. And on that bridge was Walter Hagen, who became a 9-time world champion. You had Leo Lyons, a co-founder of the NFL, and Henry McDonald, who was one of the first black NFL players in history on that bridge that day in 1907. So it was pretty crazy. So we keep going. So 1908 rolls around, and we have Leo, who's down in the bottom corner here. 1908, they're still just an amateur team, strictly amateur. Leo becomes obsessed with football. For one, his family forbid him to play football because of the death toll. And in 1905, Theodore Roosevelt tried to outlaw football, even in the colleges, because of the death tolls. So that was unsuccessful. But Leo would lie for the first 6 years of his life that he was playing with his friends at a playground or something, not football. So that was the big ruse that went on for a long time. And he would use alias names, which would be funny later on. He would see these names in the newspaper. And I have it's just amazing the names he would come up with. So in 1910, which most people don't know, East High and West High, who were huge, they would get 10 to 20,000 people to come to the games. And it was like the biggest thing in the state. They were banned from playing football in 1910. And that ban would last for 30 years in the city of Rochester because of the gambling and mostly the gambling, but there were also a lot of major injuries. So that was banned in 1910. So now you have all these kids who in 1910 have nowhere to play football, while they all turn to the sandlots and these teams. So 1910, Leo is 18 years old. He takes over the Rochester Jeffersons as their owner. Now he's a player, manager, coach, and owner of the Rochester Jeffersons. And this time he's obsessed with football. He talks of starting a pro football league when the NFL didn't exist for another 10 years. So as he works his way, as we'll see, so along the way, 1911 rolls around. Leo, he has his friendship with Walter Hagen. When Leo takes over the team in 1910, he wants to give him uniforms, which was something that was unheard of in the sandlots. And in any kind of football in the whole country, there were no uniforms for football teams. They basically had either just smocks or they wore these weird type of jerseys, or they would have a letter on it, a J for whatever, or C for the city. Leo came up with the idea of having a noticeable logo that would stand out. So he came up with the Jeffs logo. And when he was designing the uniform, Walter Hagen said, if you want to stand out, Leo, why don't you go with red, the color of blood? Because he would not play football. He was there. They would get him he'd sit in the stands. He's like, I'm not going to hurt my arm, because he was playing baseball actually, and he had a baseball contract, just Major League Baseball. But he pursued golf instead. but he never played a game of football. And he said, go with red. So there's your red. And then Walter Hagen became world famous for his flamboyancy and standing out from everybody else. So not only does he have that going on, 1911, Henry McDonald, which is an incredible story. He is the fourth known black Pro Bowl player in history. So he's one of the five that the NFL does recognize. Henry McDonald is an immigrant from Haiti. And 5 years old, his family shipped him off on a boat to come to America and grew up in Canandaigua in an orphanage. Grew up by himself. All the other people spoke different languages. He ended up graduating the top of his class, became a huge football star, and became the first black graduate of Rochester, New York at East High in 1910. So now Leo has him. So Leo recruits Henry McDonald. Now this was a big deal because 1911 racism was huge, and to recruit a top person that the people in the city knew was a big deal, and he got a lot of threats for it. And during the years, there were a lot of racial incidents with Henry. So Henry started his career for another team called the Rochester Oxfords. During that year, the Rochester Jeffersons played them 3 times. Each time the Jeffersons played them, Leo noticed that Henry McDonald was being mistreated or called black boy or whatever on his own teammates were. He would run for an 80-yard touchdown, and they would all just walk away, and they would all be celebrating, and he would just walk to the bench alone. So after the game, Leo walked over to the bench, said, you want a team on the Rochester Jeffersons, you want to be on the Rochester Jeffersons, you won't have to worry about this ever again. And that became a lifelong friendship, and Henry McDonald becomes a Rochester Jefferson. So that's that. I'm trying to do this as fast and then try to cover everything. So that's 1911. 1915 rolls around. They are now one of the best teams in the state. Just him, working 3 jobs at Rochester Telephone. He has no financial help at all. He wants to be in a pro league, and there's people talking about it at this time. But he can't compete nationally without money. So this is when he starts bugging George Eastman to help him, and that leads to some big altercations later on. So 1915, they got the uniforms, they got that, which leads us to 1916. Did I get the right one? Yes. They win the state championship against Buffalo. And that's a big deal back then for a team. So now they've got the uniforms, they've got the pro title of the state. Well, at this time, Leo was also obsessed with creating football cards, which is way off the beaten path. There are no football cards yet. Baseball cards were wildly popular. They were included in tobacco cards. They were in cigarette cases, or you would send for them in cigarette packs. Leo, I have notes saying, and he proposes this to George Eastman, why don't we design football cards of the big college talent? And we have American Chicle gum in downtown Rochester to create chiclets. They're already here. You've got George Eastman who's already here, and they can print things. We could create football cards and cause a buzz to do this. Well, Cracker Jack basically takes the idea, and they have baseball cards, which that was a whole other thing. But at this time, 1917 comes. Oh, by the way, 12 Corners of Brighton, that's where they won the state title. And I got a meeting with Brighton next week about the 12 corners that NFL games, well, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. Pre-NFL games were played there. So at the 12 Corners of Brighton, there was football games going on there. 1917 comes around. Jim Thorpe, having been a huge star in 1912 Olympics in Sweden, is the biggest thing in the world, or in the country. Everybody knows Jim Thorpe. Jim Thorpe is playing for the Canton Bulldogs out west in Ohio. They were the most dominant team in the whole country. They would defeat teams 100-0, nothing even close. There was nothing that would compete. So back then, when you didn't have TV and radio, you just had the newspapers. Well, Leo wanted to stand out, so Leo would go to Canton and challenge Jim Thorpe in the newspapers us kids from Rochester are going to come out here and kick your butt, basically, which was unheard of, ungentlemanly. That was just like, what? And caused a huge stir. So they did. They played against Canton Bulldogs in 1917. They lose 41-0, which was the lowest score against them. So that was good. But most importantly, as they're walking off the field, Leo steps aside Jim Thorpe, and the NFL does know this story, that Leo said, I want to start a league. If you're going to form one, and I've been listening to newspapers and stuff, get a hold of me. I really want to be in this new league. So Jim Thorpe says, yep, I'll keep in contact. Well, I've got Jim Thorpe's phone number, his address during that time, so they did keep in contact. So that's 1917. Time is it? 1918. We got the war, 1919, 1920. Did I skip one? Nope. 16, 17. Okay, 1920. Okay, 1920. Owners of several teams in Ohio want to form a league, a pro league, the first one of its kind. Jim Thorpe contacts Leo. Now, in the newspapers, the last 20 years I've been researching Leo and NFL history. So I had come to find out maybe 5 years ago in the Democrat and Chronicle, it says there was a small article, Jim Thorpe has dinner with Leo Lyons in Rochester. And I'm like, come on, that sounds far-fetched. And so come to find out, Jim Thorpe was playing minor league baseball for an Akron team against the Rochester Hustlers, or Russell, I can't think of their names, but he was playing for Akron. So a lot of historians have gone, well, why would he have had dinner with them? They just get on the bus and go the next day to a next game. Well, come to find out they played a doubleheader against Rochester that day. So he had spent the night in Rochester. So Leo had dinner with them that night. And my great-grandmother told me that she remembers some crazy Indian having dinner with them. And he was talking about his Olympic feats and thought it was just a bunch of babble. But here he was talking about how he won all these gold medals. So that was insane. So 1920, you also have Prohibition going on. Leo turns into a famous bootlegger in Rochester. I never dug into this. I know O'Loughlin's, which is the bar down there. Silk O'Loughlin was also a baseball umpire, famous, and Leo has stories about him and those two on Lake Ontario bringing stuff, and I guess they were shot at. But Leo got away with a lot of stuff because he worked at City Hall and he knew the police department. So he said if I didn't know people, I would have definitely been in jail. So during the founding of the NFL in 1920, in September, several times police had come by and checked the place out, and they were hiding the beer under cars because they were in a car showroom. So that's a whole another story. But it was like it almost didn't happen. Leo puts in his notes, we almost ended up in the Hooskow. Several times they came in, and luckily the owner knew the police. We got away with it. So, but at that meeting is the foundation of the NFL. So Leo was there that day. 1920. 21. Okay, now it gets crazy. 1921. Okay, the Jeffersons played 6 NFL seasons, which doesn't sound anything like today, but back then, over 35 teams folded the first year, or the first 5 years. It was incredibly hard to make it. There was the Green Bay Packers, which still kept going, obviously. The Chicago Bears and the Cardinals were around, and they still are. But at this time, Leo, he's got so many fronts. I don't know how the guy ever slept, because as I go through articles, it's just like every day he's in the newspaper, every day he's meeting with big people. So Leo, she's still working on the football idea, the football card idea. The NFL tells him, No, we don't have money for that. It's frivolous. It's just for kids. It's stupid. Okay, we don't need that. 1922, if you can see here, this little note was in his journal. That is the NFL emblem that you see today, the NFL shield with the stars. That's the actual piece out of his journal. This is the emblem that looks like today's. And on the back of it, it said, this was based on Jim Thorpe's emblem during the 1912 Olympics. He wore that shield with the stars and stripes. And since Jim Thorpe was the first president of the NFL, he thought that they should have a shield to honor Jim Thorpe. And again, I have the meeting notes. They laughed at him and said, we don't need a logo. And he kept saying, we've got to do something to be recognized. And they would always tell him, dumb idea, we got to be established first. But he said, well, to be established, you got to do something to make yourself known. But George Halas was his best friend, but George Halas also, he ran everything. So if he would leave in his notes, Leo would say, if I was George Halas, this would have been the logo the next year. So he's got that going on. And these are things that are just new that have surfaced. The shape of the football. Yeah. So come to find out through tons of years of research I was doing, there was this blueprint, there's several of them in his things about the shape of the football. Now back in those days, the early 1900s, the ball was shaped like a watermelon. It was it was round. It was like a rugby ball. So these are all things that today we look at and go, didn't everybody think this? But they didn't. Well, he's like, we're trying to play football with a ball that's round. Why don't we make something more streamlined to throw the ball? So he comes up with all these documents, all these things with circumferences. He goes to Wilson Football, which was around back then, but they weren't the big guys. Spalding was the big ball company. So he meets with George Halas, meets with the Wilson Company. He meets with all these people to propose this ball. 2 years later, another guy gets credit for it, and George Halas. Leo is nowhere mentioned in anything anywhere about a ball being made. And I've got notes that they actually made one. And in I don't think I put it down, which was the NFL actually just was asking me about it, and it's incredible. On a little piece of paper, Leo had the first pre-game workout. He basically had a tryout for this football. He had a Spalding football, and he had this new Wilson prototype. Well, he had the players for the Chicago Bears and the Jeffersons practice at pregame in front of people how they felt which ball did better. And he listed on his piece of paper, they did a pass, punt, kicking, receiving. So here's Leo doing all this stuff. It's like the Rochester Jeffersons played the Chicago Bears, which they were called the Chicago Staleys before they became the Bears. The first game at Wrigley Field that the Bears played was against the Rochester Jeffersons, which I did not know that, and they did not know it either, the people at Wrigley Field. I was like, okay. So 1921, Leo's there for that. So now he has that going on. He's got the friendships with Jim Thorpe. He's got George Eastman. Again, he's doing all these things, but nothing is like, he's still not getting anywhere, any recognition. Continues on. 1925, their last season. Brings up the Red Grange story. Red Grange is the greatest thing in the world. In 1925, he's on the cover of Time magazine. He's in Hollywood movies, which was unheard of a football player in Hollywood. And he was extremely popular. He was scoring 6-7 touchdowns a game for the University of Chicago. Well, at this time, Leo is now good friends with George Halas of the Bears, and as the end of Red Grange's football career, he wants to come on and be a pro. So here is Leo comes up with an idea of signing him into Rochester, which is a preposterous idea. Like, he would never come here and play. But he does. Leo, he turns to the mob, and I have the actual check for $5,000. So again, that sounds like nothing, but back then that was a lot. Leo turned to, and I have his checkbook register, which is incredible. Alfio Boscarino, who I guess was king of the bootleggers and had been shot at 9 times and was survived, was the biggest mobster in Rochester. Well, that $5,000 he puts on his checkbook Boscarino. He puts the name. That's how I researched who this Boscarino guy is. So here's Leo trying to outbid his best friend, the owner of the Bears, George Halas. So the Jeffersons were on their way to Detroit to play a game on Sunday. Sunday morning at a hotel in Chicago, Red Grange, who's down there in the picture with George Halas and his agent, wants to sign. He's going to sign that morning. Leo gets off the train on the way to Detroit, jumps off and goes to Chicago that morning, is in the hotel to sign Red Grange. He comes to find out that George Halas that morning had signed him an hour before. And I've got the correspondence between the two during the years, even it was years, of George Halas telling him, Leo, please don't try to get him. He's not going to come to Rochester. You'll never be able to afford him every day. So that was an interesting thing. So it was a big story that he tried to sign Red Grange, and what would have happened if he did, and people had come out to the games to see. So that was 1925. Does anybody got any questions? I don't want to keep going and rambling. And anybody have any questions? I'm trying to keep pace. I'm just worried I want to get to it all. All right. So yeah, I keep saying so. I apologize. 1921, 1925. Then. Okay, so that's just the beginning of his life. 20. What's that one? That's 20. Oh, there was the NFL, the Hall of Fame ended up letting me. They've given me a lot of access there that they don't let anybody else have, but they let me copy the actual owners' meeting minutes, which I thought was no big deal. But authors and stuff have come to me since and going, "Oh my God, you have the meeting minutes." And so I guess I was just giving them out, but then they're like, "You probably shouldn't because you probably aren't supposed to have those." So whatever, I used them for my book. So I had been told Leo wasn't that big in the owners' meetings. But the actual minutes tell another story. Leo had proposed divisions. Back at this time, there were no divisions. You just had all the teams, the best team with the record, you were declared the champion. Leo came up with the divisions, the teams in the East and the teams out in Ohio. He draws a map. He has all the things on a map. Joe Horrigan, who has been a longtime Hall of Fame president, wrote in his book recently that it was interesting that Leo had thought of the idea of these divisions. But again, at that time, they poo-pooed it and said, we don't need divisions, that's a stupid idea. So again, no matter what he did, he just wouldn't get anywhere. So there were tons of things that he didn't use, or they didn't use. 2027, 26, right? Yes, okay. So now his team folds at the end of the 25 season. Okay, I gotta backtrack a little bit. The reason why Rochester did not succeed was not because of anything other than the fact that Leo in 1920 had to recruit the best college athletes in the country to compete on a national level. Well, as soon as he started getting rid of Jimmy down the street, the quarterback, and replacing him with a Texas All-American, the people were like, this is outrageous. You can't get rid of Bobby down the street. It was all a local thing back then, especially the families, the close-knit families. So it was a big family thing. So his idea, again, was thought of as crazy, whereas Green Bay and his friend Curly Lambeau, which he did know very well, Green Bay, the opposite. They were like, oh my God, you're bringing all this college talent here. Let's rock, let's do it. And they succeed. Whereas Leo is doing it, and in 1921, he has some of the biggest all-stars in the country from Texas, Syracuse, but nobody comes out to watch the games. So at this time, Leo's working 3 jobs. He's also setting up the fields, making the goalposts of 2x4s. He is the field maintenance worker. I mean, he builds the scoreboard. He builds the benches. He's doing everything. And he's paying players out of his pockets now as well, which was insane. And so this continues. So this trend continued throughout his 6 years in the NFL. The more he kept trying to bring in big talent, the more people did not come out. Eventually he just couldn't keep up. Then he was a terrible team because he'd bring back some of the locals, and then the team sucked. But at that time, the people didn't want to come out anyway because now they're a bad team, and it was just like he was just stuck in a loop. So it just failed on him. And people always say, I wish he had moved to Syracuse or something. Maybe it would have taken off, but Rochester was definitely not for pro football. George Halas in 1920, when Leo got into the league, he thought George Eastman was going to support the team. At this time, he was a millionaire, George Eastman. He was leaving millions of dollars for a music school, a dental school, any kind of a foundation he would leave millions to. So there was a certain meeting in 1920 where he meets with George Eastman in his office at 343 State Street, and Leo describes it in detail and said that he did not like George Eastman, that he was like the coldest man he had ever looked at, that he looked like right through him. And he said, I won't give you a penny for pro football. He's like, I'll give the music school everything, millions, but not football. It's barbaric and stupid, and it's a stupid idea. He goes, as a businessman, I can tell you it's a stupid idea. So Leo's like, okay, whatever, you're not going to support me. So Leo as well was always he was a very confident guy. He didn't care what George Eastman said. So George Eastman goes, as a joke, as Leo's leaving, goes, hey, I can help you out a little bit. He goes, there's this first aid cabinet, which I forgot to bring, a first aid cabinet, a Johnson & Johnson #1 industrial box. And it's this giant metal box. It's about this big. It's like a suitcase, and it's all metal, and it would be on the floor of George Eastman Kodak for injuries. It was the first of its kind. It was world famous in newspapers about it. Would have you could set cash, you could do everything. It was like a miracle. So George Eastman goes, hey Leo, you want one of these for your crazy sport for your first aid kit? And Leo's like, yeah, sure. So Leo said he walked over to the wall and just took it off the wall. He said, I'll take it. Yeah, we always get hurt. He said, thank you. So anyways, that first aid kit had sat in my garage for 30 years. It's covered with paint stuff because I thought it was just some old cabinet that was from his days. Well, through newspapers and notes, I learned that that's what this was. And again, every single thing, I could be here, like I say, for hours. Every little item that I have has an incredible story behind it. Now that first aid kit, I had the trainer for the New York Yankees a couple years ago wanted to buy it from me. I'm like, what? And I didn't follow baseball. I'm like, here's the head trainer of the Yankees. He's like, yeah, do you realize you have the first aid kit in a professional sport? It's like no one ever kept them. They just throw them away. It's like you have one from George Eastman, and you have all this documentation about where it came from and what day, and he wanted to buy it, and I said, no, I can't. But in 1925, the Jeffersons were at the Polo Grounds to play the New York Giants, and after the game, some fans had come out of the stands and grabbed the first aid kit and were running away with it, because I guess it was worth a lot of money on the black market. So ends up a couple of New York Giants guys chased them and beat them up, and then they were arrested, and that was like a whole story, but it's like the craziest things. So, all right, let me keep moving here. Okay, so 1926, he's still obsessed with the football cards. Here's this document that the NFL wanted, but I said, no, you can't have it. But this is a proposal for a football card based on the Cracker Jack baseball card from 1916. And this is I think it's a Rochester player. There's a couple of them that I have. But Yeah, he had everything, the dimensions and everything. It would be another 10 years, and the first football cards came out exactly the way he had designed it. Again, so yeah, he had gone to William Wrigley. He had gone to everybody. So during that time, he's also starts a pro bowling league in 1930 with Buffalo, and that's a big thing in the newspapers for like a decade. That's Leo here. In 1935, Leo starts the Leo V. Lyons Paint Company, which becomes a state-of-the-art hardware store. It's 2 floors high. It's on State Street, downtown Rochester. It has 3 addresses. It had 23, 25, or whatever. It has 3 of them. It's straight down by the bus garage, or almost by the Blue Cross Arena. I went to look. It's just old abandoned buildings right now. But at that time, he was world recognized. He was at the Waldorf Astoria, honored as opening up this state-of-the-art hardware store. So my mom was always like, okay, wait a minute. There's pictures in the newspaper, these things like there's big columns, all this fancy stuff. Like Rio is not rich. It's like, how does he have this state-of-the-art, world-famous hardware store? Come to find out in Leo's notes that George Halas, when he knew that he basically stole Red Grange from Leo, led to Leo's quitting football, he felt guilty, George Halas. So George Halas somewhere gave him a loan or gave him money to open up a paint business. And so I thought I just had it at that and just went with it. But then I was looking in the newspaper, and years earlier you can see that George Halas invites Leo Lyons to attend a paint store symposium, how to start a thing. So I could even follow the trail years earlier that he actually invited Leo to Chicago to learn the paint business to succeed. So again, there's just so many layers. 1940, he had a letter from Fritz Pollard, who is one of the NFL's first NFL players, and he writes how he thanked Leo for hiring a black player during that time, because that was unheard of. 640. Where are we? 41. Okay. 1941, that's Jim Thorpe here as he's older. Leo brings Jim Thorpe to all the Rochester City schools to speak about Indian plights and reservations, how bad they were. And they said that he was a huge hit with the parents, obviously. They had all come, when they heard that Jim Thorpe was coming to the school, all the parents came too, so it caused a big ruckus. At this time as well, from the 30s, now we're in the 40s, Leo is proposing a Hall of Fame. He is collecting some of the stuff. He has thousands of artifacts, jerseys, footballs. There is no Hall of Fame. So in 1933, when Cooperstown opened up, Leo was like, well, football should have some kind of a museum. So I have 7 letters from him contacting every commissioner that there was, proposing a football museum. Again, laughed at. No, we don't need a museum. It's like it's going to cost too much money. The league doesn't have any money. Just hold on to this stuff. And so it was in the papers, and there was a fire in 1950 where he almost lost all of it. He lived on Lake Avenue in Charlotte, or Beach Avenue, I'm sorry. There was a big thing in the newspaper, NFL history most goes up in flames with this fire. So that was that. We got Aquinas. Art Rooney also became a good friend of Leo's. They would actually go to each other's houses. I've got Christmas cards between the two of them. They were on first, like, how's your wife? It was very personal. So Leo proposes to have NFL pregame or preseason games in Rochester. So he turned to Aquinas. So in 1953, I think it was, Rochester stages the first NFL preseason game. Steelers and the Colts, and then it was the Eagles and somebody. But it was the first time in Rochester, and Art Rooney came here. It was a big thing for charity, and it was a big deal. So they did it for 2 years, but then people didn't come out they weren't that into it, so it stopped at Aquinas. This was something I just found out last year, well, just before the book came out, we stuck it in. Leo's daughter, I should have known something like this would happen with her, because come to find out that she's one of the founders of St. John Fisher College. Now I'm like, wait a minute, that's a men's college, like, what? So I come through his notes, and I had known that she was involved with St. John in Nazareth for a long time, and she died young of leukemia. And in the 40s and 50s, she was always in the newspaper as being like this great humanitarian. She does all these things for all these schools. So when she died, all the men that were like the founders of there said, don't forget Zelda Lyons, who was one of the original founders, who went around, and actually it was her idea to have the college, St. John Fisher, in Rochester. I'm like, what? Now, that was big news because she was a female in the 40s and 50s. Yeah. It's not exactly women's territory to be, doing these things. So she made world news and stuff that she did that. So when the Bills were here at training camp at St. John Fisher, someone goes, do you know that you've got your great-grandfather is a co-founder of the NFL, and his daughter is a co-founder of St. John Fisher College? It's like, it's kind of a neat tie-in, and now the Bills are playing here, and he lived in Pittsford as well at the end. So that was a neat thing. And,
do the Bills know about that?
Yes, they do. And fortunately, they don't want to do anything. But that's that. 1960 rolls around. P. Rozelle takes over as the boss of the NFL. Leo goes to him and says, we have to build this museum. I have all these things. It's going to waste. So they finally decide that they're going to open up a Hall of Fame. So now Leo's like, oh my God, I'm in. They have the first Hall of Fame game. There's P. Rozelle down here, George Halas, and Leo on the sideline. We got Leo with Joe Guyon, who was one of the famous Indians, inducted. Leo was with him when he got inducted. So here's Leo involved in everything. I got notes. The commissioner's like, Leo, we're going to open up a Hall of Fame. You're going to be big. This is all going to be, all about you. Well, again, I should have known better. So after he donates millions of dollars worth of items, which would be worth today, he opens it. But then suddenly there's a note. Oh, by the way, Leo, the general manager of the Washington Redskins, he's going to be the new president of the Hall of Fame. And he's like, what? And because, Leo he didn't even attend high school. So he had no administrative, any kind of a prowess at all. So I can understand a little bit why they wouldn't, but he was just shut right out from then on. It was like he was nobody. And he's like, wait a minute, this is my idea. These are my items that you're opening the Hall of Fame with. So there was bad blood there. At the same time, 1960, Nelson Rockefeller, who was the governor of New York, and P. Rozelle honor Leo with NFL 1 license plates, which I have, thankfully, 2 of them back there, one in the 60s and one in the 70s. And that was like a lifetime thing, and he would get NFL plates for life with the NFL 1 plates. And ironically, Joe Bach, who played on the Bills and the USFL Houston Gamblers with Jim Kelly, was Leo's paper boy in Pittsburgh. This is all a big story. And so, as a kid, he would deliver his paper in Pittsburgh to him. And he remembers one day seeing NFL 1 plates on his car. So Leo was out that day. Joe Bach was like, hey, mister, who are you? It says NFL 1 on your plates. You must be somebody. So he goes, you want to come downstairs? I have this huge museum. So the way he was telling it was so funny because he goes, all right. He goes, I was sizing him up, your great-grandfather. I'm like, I could take him if he's some kind of a pervert or something. He wants me down in his basement. It's like, I could take him. I'm a pretty big guy. I was laughing so hard. The way he was telling, he's like, as we're going down the steps, I'm like, yeah, I can shove him off these steps if he's, he's somebody bad. So, yeah, you think about it now these days, like, yeah, you never know. So, anyways, he had gone down there, and he's one of my witnesses of how much stuff he had in his basement. There was still a ton, even after he had donated. So he would go to all the NFL parades with famous movie stars. He had the license plate in the parades. And then it's Henry McDonald when they were old. They were still best friends. That's Leo with Vince Lombardi. I've got like pictures of everything. That's Leo on the sideline with some kids that had cancer. This is the cake cutting ceremony and everything for the Hall of Fame. Leo is one of the few people that's there, and then nothing. So in the 70s, he's still alive. He's here with Ron DeFrance. They had interviewed him, and he did a bunch of interviews in his basement. And in 76, he passed away. So when I would go to the Hall of Fame, as I'm researching all this, I'd go there maybe 10 years ago, and I'm like, there's no mention of Leo Lyons anywhere in the building. There's Fan of the Year, has a whole wall. Fan of the Year, you know, this guy, he has all this stuff. And I'm like, how is Leo Lyons nowhere in here? And I told the president of the Hall of Fame, I'm like, how does Leo and Rochester get just totally like they didn't exist? They said they played 6 seasons in the NFL. Oh, and by the way, Leo became the honorary historian of the NFL in 1960 at an owners meeting in Los Angeles. He finally did get recognition from the owners as a historian of the league. So he got that title. But so they kept saying, oh, they're going to do something. But luckily in 2020, the owner of the Minnesota Vikings, Ziggy Wolf, donated, of course, again, it's all money, donated like $5 million to the Hall of Fame, and they opened up the Founders Exhibit, which is a permanent exhibit at the Hall of Fame. And so that is there now, thank God. And it mentions Leo Lyons and the Rochester Jeffersons. But still, there's no recognition on any level for what he did. And so basically what I'm doing is going back and still finding things about Leo. But I think it's a crazy legacy of people don't know these things. Now, I've glossed over a lot of this. There's so many stories, so many historical things I'm not even talking about, that I felt bad after I learned all this. It's like nobody knows him in Rochester. So we wrote a book, we got that done, and now we're at the website. We're doing things with different projects with the NFL. So I just want him more well known than he is now, as being nobody. I mean, if I had spent my entire life doing this and then nobody in the NFL, no one in your hometown, nobody knows who you are, I think it's kind of sad. Yeah. So that's where I am now. So I've just started doing these presentations. I'm very uncomfortable doing them, but this is the most people by far I've ever had. It's like my phobia. So, and sometimes I had to speak at the Hall of Fame years ago, and I was like, oh my God, there's NFL players here. There's all these people. I'm in front of this huge crowd, and I'm like, oh my God. And I told them, I laughed. I'm like, if I pass out, please, I'm a big guy. Just let me fall, and then we can get me up, and then I can keep talking. So, but it's been a lifelong experience. I mean, I got this tattoo years ago of the leather helmet and the Jeff's logo. Oh, yeah. It's like I've been always obsessed with him. We have a huge connection because I was born on March 11th, and he was born on March 11th. And I wasn't due for another 2 weeks or something, and Leo always joked with my mom, that kid's going to be born on my birthday, and he's going to be my guy. And sure enough, I'm born on his birthday. And then the trophy, which I didn't bring, the 1916 state championship trophy, he has that, I think, well, Leo's holding it down there at the bottom. And as a kid, we would always go to his house in Pittsford. As a baby, I was always drawn to this trophy because it was a shiny chrome football. So Leo would hold me with the football, and my mom's, I'd pass out in his lap. And so now I have that football in my possession, and it's how it's come full circle that I still have the football. And it's a miracle that most of these things are still here. The football, 20 years ago, my uncle had the football. He finally gifted it to me. He was robbed. He lived in Washington, D.C., and that trophy was next to the big screen TV. This ended up on the floor with a huge dent in it, and they took the TV, but they didn't take the trophy. So that could easily have been gone. So I just feel like this is meant to be. It's like there's been, over the last 5 years, the most insane things have happened. And I think it's just special. And again, I didn't think anyone would even come out and nobody cares about it. So I've been doing it, and so it's been good the last few times, and And so this, I don't know where it's going to lead. Like I say, somebody is pitching a Netflix series. There is a producer in Texas who's trying to do it. And 10 years ago, Angelina Jolie had a production company. They were going to do this. It was green lighted. They were going to do it, and then they ran out of money. One of the backers pulled out, and they ran out of money. And you need like millions of dollars to do a Netflix series, so that failed. So, but but I laugh at today. I'm like, do you watch these things? And there's like, it's just stupid stuff. I mean, if you go through this, I mean, the things that Curly Lambeau. I have Curly Lambeau's money box from the Green Bay Packers in 1925. It's like, I thought it was just an old box. My mom used it to put her needles and thread in. Our whole life growing up, we never knew what it was, but there was a plate on the top of it that said GBP. So I'm looking at players' names on the team. There's no GBP. What's G? Nothing. I'm like, I don't know what GBP stands for. Well, these notes, if you go through them all, somewhere scribbled on a magazine, on a Saturday Evening Post, he goes, he has Curly Lambeau's money box with GBP stamped on top. It's a little teeny ornate plate that's there. And Curly Lambeau, after the Packers played the Jeffersons in Green Bay, Curly Lambeau was going to throw it away because it had a sticky latch. And Leo's like, I could take that. That's waterproof. Again, he's not afraid to just tell you. He didn't. Curly, here, give me that. I'll use it. This is the thing that sat. And I only knew what it was, not from the plate, but from the sticky latch, because my mom would always swear and try to throw it out because it would never. You have to just shake it, and it finally pop open. So I have the Green Bay Packers, things like that. I have things that are just like, how it didn't get thrown away. I mean, actually some stuff has been thrown away, which is scary to think. But doing all this, families, I mean, now I'm pumping into more families. When I was doing the book, I put stuff out, but it's hard to get a hold of people. And maybe I'll do an updated book down the road, but a lot of families have come across, and it's been really exciting. So that's it. It's at 8 o'clock. I did it. Whew. I need a beer.